The light on my 50th birthday was particularly beautiful. The sun streamed through the bay windows, striking the crystal chandelier and scattering 1,000 tiny rainbows across the room. Those prisms of light danced on the champagne roses I had arranged myself that morning, making each soft petal look as though it were edged in gold. I was just bringing the final dish to the table, a rich, fragrant seafood bisque, carefully balancing the heavy tureen in my hands. The warmth of the porcelain seeped through my fingertips, a comforting heat that traveled all the way to my heart. For 30 years this had been my life. My entire world had revolved around this one dining table. My husband Martin's preferences, my son Daniel's picky eating habits, my daughter Olivia's favorite dishes. I knew them all better than the rhythm of my own pulse. I had orchestrated this day, this perfect celebration, believing it would be the culmination of my life's work, a sort of lifetime achievement award for 3 decades of flawless domestic service. The house was filled with guests, a symphony of clinking glasses and cheerful chatter. Martin, looking dapper and distinguished in a new dark gray suit I'd bought him for the occasion, his hair combed back perfectly, was the picture of success, his face flush with wine and good cheer. He raised his glass, cleared his throat, and an expectant hush fell over the grand dining room. I looked at him, my husband, with a smile on my face, not even realizing the pathetic, hopeful eagerness that must have been shining in my eyes. What would he say? Would he thank me for my 30 years of tireless devotion? Would he raise a toast to our future, promising to walk beside me for the next 30 years? My dear friends and family, he began, his voice booming with the practiced confidence of a corporate executive. Today is my wife Garcia's 50th birthday. A polite round of applause rippled through the room. All eyes turned to me. I felt a blush creep up my neck and I smoothed down the collar of my dress, a little embarrassed by all the attention. And on this special occasion, Martin continued, pausing for dramatic effect, I have a very important announcement to make. He swept his gaze across the room, letting the anticipation build before his eyes finally landed on me. His stare was as sharp and deliberate as a pin being pressed into a board. From this day forward, I am implementing a strict 50-50 split of all expenses with Garcia. There was a sound like a roar in my ears. It felt as if someone had pried open my skull and the cold, formal air of the dining room rushed in, freezing my thoughts solid. What? 50-50 split? Splitting the bills? I stared at him, desperately searching that familiar face for any hint of a joke, any trace of humor in his eyes. There was none. There was only a cold, triumphant certainty. The look in his eyes was a poisoned blade, and he plunged it straight into my heart without a moment's hesitation. I, Martin, have worked diligently my entire life, he proclaimed, his voice echoing in the dead silent hall. Every word he spoke felt like another nail being hammered into my coffin. And for 30 of those years, I have supported this woman. He gestured toward me with a dismissive flick of his hand. The food she eats, the clothes she wears, the luxuries she enjoys. Which of these things did not come from my money? I have done more than my duty. I have been more than generous. He let that sink in. Now the children are grown and I am retired. It makes no sense for me to continue to be treated like an ATM, to keep funding the life of a person who contributes nothing. So from now on all household expenses will be split. 1/2 for me, 1/2 for her. It's time for Garcia to start pulling her own weight. The moment the words left his mouth, the room exploded into a low murmur of conversation. The same relatives who had been smiling at me moments before now looked at me with open, undisguised pity and contempt. Their whispers were sharp and cruel like a swarm of stinging insects. Well, Martin has a point. A woman can't expect to be taken care of forever. Exactly. She's 50 years old, not some little princess. It can't have been easy for Martin all these years. Look at that dress she's wearing. The fabric looks expensive. All paid for with Martin's blood, sweat, and tears, I bet. The gossip crawled over my skin, 1,000 slimy, biting things that burrowed deep into my soul. A profound chill washed over me and I instinctively looked for my children, my beautiful children. My son Daniel. My precious boy who I had cradled and protected his entire life. The one I'd held so carefully, afraid he might fall. The one I'd loved so fiercely, afraid the world might harm him. He was staring down at his phone, his head bowed, his thumbs flying across the screen as if he were in the middle of a life-or-death video game. He couldn't even be bothered to look up. And my daughter Olivia. My brilliant, accomplished daughter, my pride and joy. Her eyes darted away from mine. She lifted her glass of juice, hiding her face behind it, pretending she hadn't seen a thing, hadn't heard a thing. 30 years of marriage. 26 years of motherhood. In that single brutal moment, my entire life was exposed as a ridiculous, pathetic joke. And I was the punchline. I was the clown in the gaudy costume, standing alone in the center of the stage, forced to endure the judgment and laughter of the entire world. And my husband, my partner, the man who was supposed to be my family, was the one who had gleefully pushed me into the spotlight. Martin was soaking it all in, visibly pleased with the effect he had created. He looked down at me from his position of power, his expression that of an artist admiring a masterpiece he has just shattered into a million pieces. He was waiting for me to cry, to scream, to fall apart at his feet and beg him for forgiveness. But I didn't. I couldn't. The place in my chest where my heart used to be was just a hollow, empty cavity, a patch of scorched earth left behind by the lightning strike of his words. The pain was gone, replaced by a cold, quiet calm. I looked at him not as my husband but as a stranger, a clumsy performer in a cheap and tawdry circus act. Then I rose to my feet. Every eye in the room swiveled to me. I slowly, deliberately, raised my hands to my neck and unclasped the pearl necklace he had given me for my birthday. A last-minute purchase he'd picked up on sale at the mall. Cost $99. I laid it gently on the velvet tablecloth. The pearls rolled for a moment before coming to a stop next to a glass of red wine, their lustrous surface reflecting my own pale, bloodless face. "As you wish," I said. My voice was quiet, almost a whisper, but it cut through the silence of the room like a thunderclap, silencing the whispers and the smirks. I didn't look at anyone else. Not at my smug, triumphant husband. Not at my cold, indifferent children. And certainly not at the relatives who were so hungry for a spectacle. I turned my back on all of them. And step by steady step I walked out of the house that I had once considered my entire world. I walked away with a straight back and a firm stride, and I did not feel a single pang of regret. I drove to my mother's old house. It had been sitting empty for nearly a decade, and when I pushed open the heavy front door, the air that hit me was thick with the musty smell of dust and disuse, mingled with the faint chemical scent of mothballs. There were no crystal chandeliers here, no champagne roses, only rooms shrouded in white sheets and a profound, bone-deep silence. But as I stood there in the entryway, I felt a sense of peace settle over me for the first time that day. This was my home. This was where I belonged. I peeled off the ridiculous, expensive dress and changed into an old t-shirt and a comfortable pair of pants. Then I started to clean. I wanted to lose myself in the physical exertion, to scrub and sweep and polish until my muscles ached, anything to numb the dull, persistent pain in my chest. I was in my father's study wiping down the dusty bookshelves when my phone rang. It was my best friend, Elena. The second I answered, her voice, a furious whirlwind of concern, erupted from the speaker. "Garcia, where the hell are you? Don't tell me you're still in that house with that scumbag. You should have left him years ago. Where are you? And why aren't you crying? For God's sake, you need to let it out." Hearing her frantic, indignant voice on my behalf, the iron band that had been clenched around my heart for hours finally loosened just a little. I didn't cry. I just told her quietly, "Elena, I'm okay. I'm at my mom's house." "Stay put," was all she said before hanging up. Half an hour later she burst through the door like a hurricane, a bottle of expensive red wine in one hand and 2 glasses in the other. She took in the scene, the dusty, chaotic rooms, my disheveled appearance, and her eyes immediately filled with tears. "You absolute fool," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Look at what you've let them do to you. Look at the state you're in." She snatched the cleaning rag from my hand and pushed me down onto a dust-covered sofa. "Tao, you cry," she commanded. "Cry right now. Let out all 30 years of the misery he put you through." I looked at my dear friend and just shook my head. The tears had already been shed. They had dried up back at that miserable birthday party, leaving behind nothing but a barren, silent wasteland inside me. I stood up and walked over to the largest bookshelf at the far end of my father's study. I dragged a stool over, climbed up, and reached for a heavy, dust-covered mahogany box on the very top shelf. "Elena, can you give me a hand?" Though she looked confused, she came over and helped me lift the heavy box down and carry it to the desk. It was incredibly heavy, intricately carved with elaborate cloud patterns, and secured with a small brass lock that was now green with age. I reached under the collar of my shirt and pulled out a thin chain. A small, delicate key hung from it, a key I had worn around my neck every day for years. I fitted it into the lock and turned. With a soft, satisfying click, the box opened. Elena leaned in, her curiosity piqued, expecting to see a treasure trove of gold, jewels, or antique scrolls. But the box contained none of those things. It was filled to the brim with stacks of documents, each one neatly wrapped and bound in brown craft paper envelopes. I opened the first one. Inside were more than a dozen dark red property deeds. The deed to the sprawling city center apartment we lived in. The deed to the suburban villa with the manicured lawn. The deeds to several prime commercial storefronts in the heart of the city's most expensive shopping district. And on the ownership page of every single one, the name was printed in clear, bold letters. Garcia. My name. Elena's eyes went wide. I opened the second envelope. This one contained stock transfer agreements and documents for a series of trust funds. My father's company, which had been managed by a team of professionals for years, was still legally mine. The largest block of shares and the enormous dividends they generated had all been placed in a trust fund for my benefit. Elena picked up one of the documents, her fingers trembling slightly as she read it. I opened a third and then a fourth. Vehicle titles, large-scale insurance policies, bank certificates. At the very end of each file, there was a notarized statement from a top-tier law firm. A single sentence was printed in bold text at the bottom of each page. All of the above assets are designated as a premarital personal gift from Mr. Nicholas to his daughter, Garcia. Their ownership, right of use, and right of disposal belong solely to Garcia and are independent of her marital status. Elena was speechless. She looked from the mountain of papers spread across the desk to me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish, unable to form a single word. My own mind drifted back to the last time I saw my father. He was in his hospital bed, his breath weak, but his eyes were as clear and sharp as ever. He held my hand, his grip surprisingly strong. Garcia, he'd said, I don't need you to be some high-powered businesswoman. All I want is for you to have a life of peace and happiness. He paused, taking a shallow breath. But these things, this is your foundation. This is the capital that will allow you to stand up straight no matter what life throws at you. Remember, my girl, never let anyone break your spine. At the time I was a newlywed, drunk on what I thought was true love. I believed Martin was all the security I would ever need. I dismissed my father's words as the ramblings of a protective old man, and I had put this box away, locked it, and forgotten about it for 3 decades. It turned out I wasn't the helpless, clinging vine I had allowed myself to become. I had simply forgotten that I was always meant to be an oak tree, strong enough to weather any storm on my own. Just then my phone screen lit up. It was a text message from Martin. Come home when you're done with your tantrum. Apologize and we can put this behind us. Don't embarrass yourself any further. The condescending tone, the posture of a king offering a pardon to a groveling subject. I stared at the message and for the first time in 30 years of marriage I laughed. It was a cold, bitter sound that brought fresh tears to my eyes. I handed the phone to Elena. She read the message and her face contorted with rage. She threw her wine glass against the fireplace, where it shattered into 1,000 pieces. That bastard. That absolute piece of filth. Who does he think he is? The Emperor. I wiped the tears from my face and picked up the deed to one of the storefronts, my eyes filled with a resolve I hadn't felt in years. Elena, I said, my voice steady and clear. I want to open a shop. I pointed to the address on the deed. Right here. In the space my father left me. The anger in Elena's eyes was instantly replaced by a brilliant spark of excitement. She slapped her thigh. Yes, absolutely. And I'll help you. A wide grin spread across her face. I've even got the perfect name for it. We'll call it the Sunset Pavilion. Perfect, I said. To a new life. Our new life. Outside, a single ray of sunlight finally broke through the thick afternoon clouds, piercing the gloom of the long-neglected study. I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my bones that a new day was dawning. Thanks to Elena, who was a force of nature in the business world, the renovation of the Sunset Pavilion was executed with military precision. In less than 2 weeks, an elegant, serene, and incredibly chic cafe quietly opened its doors on the city's most bustling commercial street. During that time, I never returned to my so-called home. Martin called a few times, but I didn't answer. Eventually, I suppose his pride got the better of him and the calls stopped. It was actually my darling son Daniel who broke first. One afternoon, while I was in the cafe learning the art of tea brewing from a master, his call came through. I swiped to answer but remained silent. His impatient voice came through the line, laced with the explosive sounds of a video game in the background. "Mom, are you done with this little drama? You need to come home now." He sounded petulant like a child. "There's no one here to cook. I'm sick of takeout. And I have a mountain of shirts to be washed. I have a big meeting tomorrow and nothing clean to wear." His tone was so matter-of-fact, so entitled, as if I were his personal, unpaid servant, and my only purpose was to cater to his needs. I picked up a small, delicate Celadone teacup, feeling its smooth, cool surface against my fingertips. "Your father was the one who wanted to split everything 50-50, wasn't he?" I said, my voice perfectly calm. "If we're splitting living expenses, it only seems fair that we split the household chores as well. You're 26 years old, Daniel. You're an adult. It's time you learned how to do your own laundry and cook for yourself." And with that, before he could even process what I'd said, I hung up. I could just imagine him staring at his phone, the dial tone buzzing in his ear, his mind struggling to catch up. Sure enough, it wasn't long before Martin's call followed. His tone was much more composed than our son's, heavy with the gravitas of a man about to deliver a verdict. "Garcia, what is the meaning of this? The internet is off and the gas, water and electricity have all been shut off for non-payment. Are you refusing to even pay these basic bills now?" I raised the teacup to my lips, gently blowing away the steam and the floating leaves, and took a small sip. The fragrance was divine. "Martin," I said evenly, "the utility accounts for our home, the water, the gas, the electricity, the internet, they are all under my name. Since you were so insistent on splitting things, I thought it would be best to make a clean break. So I took the liberty of calling each company and closing all of the accounts. If you wish to have those services, you'll need to go down to their offices with your own identification and the property deed and open new accounts in your name." "What?" His voice cracked on the other end of the line. He was completely stunned. He started yelling, his voice tinny and shrill. "Garcia, are you insane? You have all the property deeds. How am I supposed to open an account without them?" "Well," I said with a sigh that was pure performance, "that sounds like a problem for you to solve." I hung up the phone again. I could almost see him on the other side, his face turning a shade of purple that would clash horribly with his expensive suit. He was forced to dip into his personal savings, checking into hotels and eating at expensive restaurants. But without his free housekeeper and his automatically paid bills, he was discovering for the first time how inconvenient life could be. His comfortable standard of living was plummeting, and there was nothing he could do about it. On the official opening day of the Sunset Pavilion, Elena leveraged her extensive network of contacts, inviting a crowd of city socialites and media reporters. The cafe's refined atmosphere, its top-tier teas, coffees, and pastries, combined with the deliciously scandalous backstory of its owner, made it an instant sensation. It became so popular that you had to make a reservation 3 days in advance. Naturally, word of my success reached Martin. I imagine he felt that my thriving without him was a direct insult to his ego. So, egged on by his mistress, a woman named Victoria, he decided to pay my establishment a visit to put me in my place. It was a busy afternoon, the cafe buzzing with customers. Martin walked in with Victoria on his arm, the woman dressed to the nines in a gaudy, attention-grabbing outfit. He deliberately chose the most conspicuous table in the room, right by the window, and began to speak in a voice just loud enough for everyone around them to hear. "The decor is acceptable, I suppose," he said with a sniff. "A bit provincial, though. It lacks a certain class." Victoria, in a saccharine, high-pitched voice, chimed in, "Oh, Martin, don't be so critical. It's Garcia's first time running a business after all. We have to admire the effort." As she spoke, she shot a triumphant, challenging look in my direction. Not all of us can afford to treat business as a little hobby to pass the time. Some of us actually have to work for a living. I watched their clumsy two-person play unfold, feeling nothing but a mild amusement. This was the best they could do. I didn't send a waiter over. Instead, I picked up a menu myself and walked to their table, a polite, professional, and utterly detached smile fixed on my face. "Good afternoon," I said. "What can I get for you?" Martin made a great show of studying the menu before pointing to the most expensive tea service. "We'll have this. And bring us a selection of your priciest pastries as well." He handed the menu back to me with an air of immense condescension, as if he were bestowing a great honor upon me. Victoria, meanwhile, looked me up and down like a predator sizing up its prey, her eyes gleaming with a smug sense of victory. I simply nodded and went to the counter to place their order. Soon their food and tea were served. They continued their little performance, eating and drinking while loudly critiquing everything, dropping not-so-subtle hints about a certain cafe owner who was old, washed up, and abandoned by her husband. I let them have their moment. When they had finally exhausted their supply of insults and were preparing to make their grand exit, I walked back to their table, the bill in my hand. I placed it gently on the table between them, my professional smile never wavering. "That will be $888, Mr. Martin." Martin, who was halfway out of his chair, froze. He snatched the bill from the table and stared at it, his eyes bulging. "What? $800 for a pot of tea and a few little cakes? This is highway robbery. This is a scam." My smile remained perfectly in place. I pointed to the prices clearly listed on the menu. "We are very transparent about our pricing, sir. The tea service you ordered features ingredients imported from New Zealand, Japan, and the Netherlands. Considering the quality, this price is actually quite reasonable." I paused, then leaned in slightly, my eyes locking with his, the smile never reaching them. "Besides," I added, my voice dropping to a confidential murmur, "Ori, the one who wanted to split everything down the middle, remember? Since we're splitting everything, this little treat is naturally on you. I am under no obligation to pay for your afternoon tea." The color drained from Martin's face. It went from a furious red to a pasty white in a matter of seconds. He stared at the damning number on the bill, then glanced around at the other patrons, who were now openly watching him with amused expressions. He could feel their eyes on him, and a hot flush of shame crept up his neck. Victoria was just as stunned. She had come here expecting to witness my humiliation, but now she was the one caught in the spotlight looking like a fool. In the end, with the entire cafe watching, Martin fumbled for his wallet and with trembling hands paid the bill. The look on his face, a mixture of profound indignation and agonizing financial pain, was truly a sight to behold. It was our first direct confrontation since that day, and I had won decisively. That humiliating defeat at the cafe kept Martin quiet for a while. But it wasn't long before a much larger problem landed in his lap. His mistress, Victoria, a divorcee with a son, had been pressuring him to send the boy to an exclusive boarding school in Switzerland. Martin, desperate to maintain his image as a wealthy and powerful man, had boasted that he would cover all the expenses, including the hefty $70,000 tuition fee. It was a promise he couldn't keep. His personal savings had been decimated by his recent hotel stays, lavish meals, and of course, the exorbitantly priced tea. His eyes fell upon what he always called our investment property. It was a small apartment in a prime school district, one he had pestered me into buying years ago using my own personal funds, money my mother had given me. He had always claimed the purchase was a result of his brilliant financial foresight and therefore believed he had the right to dispose of it as he saw fit. He eagerly contacted a real estate agent to list the property. The agent, after a quick search of the property records, politely informed him, "I'm sorry, Mr. Martin, but the sole owner of this property is a Ms. Garcia. You don't have the legal authority to sell it." Martin, refusing to believe it, called several other agencies. Each one gave him the same answer. The final blow came when one agent, in a hushed tone, let him in on a little secret. The property had a note in its file, personally placed by the owner, explicitly forbidding any sales or mortgages of any kind. It was then that a true cold panic finally began to set in. He stormed into my cafe like a charging bull. "Garcia, what the hell do you think you're doing? I was the one who decided to buy that apartment. What gives you the right to make decisions about it alone?" He was bellowing, his voice echoing through the quiet cafe, startling my customers. I didn't even look at him. I simply picked up my phone and made a call to my lawyer. 10 minutes later, Garrett, An impeccably dressed man with a quiet but commanding presence walked into the cafe. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. He opened his briefcase, pulled out a document and presented it to Martin. "Mr. Martin," Garrett said, his voice calm and firm. "On behalf of my client, Ms. Garcia, I am serving you with this asset verification notice. It clearly lists all 17 properties that you refer to as our families, including the villa you currently reside in, the Mercedes you drive, and the apartment you are attempting to sell. All of them are the premarital personal property of Ms. Garcia. Legally speaking, Mr. Martin, you do not have a claim to a single penny of it." Martin stared at the document, the black and white text swimming before his eyes. His hands began to shake violently. "No. This is impossible. It's a lie. You're all conspiring against me." He fled the cafe in a rage, raced home and tore the house apart, desperately searching for a single property deed with his name on it. He found nothing. With the sale of the apartment blocked, Martin turned to his last resort: credit cards. He held several supplementary cards linked to my primary accounts, all with very high credit limits. His plan was to max them out, get cash advances and scrape together the money for Victoria's son's tuition. But when he tried to make a large purchase at a department store, the cashier informed him, "I'm sorry, sir, this card has been cancelled." He tried another card and then another. The result was the same every time. His financial lifeline had been severed completely. The grand promises he had made to Victoria now felt like a slap in the face, leaving his head spinning. I heard later that he and Victoria had their first truly vicious argument that night. She screamed at him, calling him a pathetic, useless man who was all talk. In his rage and humiliation he hit her. But Martin wasn't the only one in turmoil. So was my dear son Daniel. He had a cushy job at a reputable company, great pay, relaxed hours, a position he frequently bragged about to his friends. What he didn't know, or perhaps chose to forget, was that the job had been arranged by Mr. Hernandez, an old colleague of my father's, as a personal favor to me. I gave Mr. Hernandez a call. I didn't embellish or editorialize. I simply recounted the events of my 50th birthday party, telling him exactly what had happened. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Finally, Mr. Hernandez said, his voice heavy with disappointment, "Garcia, I am so sorry you were treated that way. I know what I have to do." The very next day, Daniel received a transfer notice. He was being reassigned from his comfortable position in the corporate headquarters to a remote warehouse on the outskirts of the city. His new title was Inventory Manager. His bonuses, benefits, and expense account were all eliminated. Now it was Daniel's turn to panic. He drove back from the suburbs that night and burst into the cafe breathless and wild-eyed. "Mom, what did you say to Mr. Hernandez? Why would you do this? You've ruined my career." His eyes were bloodshot, his face a mask of betrayal and rage. I was in the middle of polishing a tea set with a soft linen cloth. I looked up at him, my gaze cold. "I ruined your career?" I set down the cloth, rose from my chair and walked slowly toward him until I was standing right in front of him. "Daniel, on my birthday, when your father stood up in front of all those people and announced his plan to humiliate me, to erase 30 years of my life and my dignity, what were you doing?" I didn't wait for an answer. "You were staring at your phone. When he stood there, pointing his finger at me, calling me a useless freeloader who did nothing but spend his money, what were you doing? You were pretending not to hear. You thought I was overreacting, that I was embarrassing you in front of your friends and family." I looked him straight in the eye. "Daniel, your father may have been the one holding the knife that day, but you were his loyal accomplice, the one who handed it to him. Now that the blade has turned around and pricked your skin just a little bit, you're crying in pain? Have you ever stopped for 1 second to think about the fact that my heart has been stabbed by the two of you until it's nothing but a shredded, bleeding mess? You think your father is so capable, don't you? You think the two of you would be so much better off without me? Well, now's your chance. Go on. Go out into the world and see what kind of life you can build with your own two hands." Every word I spoke was a hammer blow, striking at the very foundation of his entitled world. The anger on his face slowly melted away, replaced by a dawning look of confusion and fear. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. I looked at his lost, broken expression and felt not a shred of pity. Grief has its limits. My heart had died on the night of my birthday party, murdered by the two people I loved most in the world. The next step was to take back my house. My lawyer, Garrett, drafted a formal, impeccably worded letter and sent it to the address I had called home for 3 decades. The letter was simple and direct. It demanded that Mr. Martin and Mr. Daniel vacate the premises, which were the sole property of Ms. Garcia, within 15 days. Failure to comply would result in legal action and forced removal. That letter was the final straw for Martin. He completely unraveled. The horrifying realization finally dawned on him. The luxurious home he had been so proud of, the place he had lived in for 30 years, the symbol of his status that he used to impress his friends, it could all be taken away from him at a moment's notice. Then came the second letter. This one demanded the immediate return of the Mercedes S-Class sedan he had been driving for the past 5 years. The vehicle, like everything else, was registered in my name, another piece of my premarital property. Losing the mansion and the luxury car stripped him of all his carefully constructed prestige. The respectable retired corporate manager was suddenly a comical, pathetic figure. He was like an actor who had been stripped of his costume on stage, left shivering and exposed for all to see. News travels fast. The same relatives who had smirked at me at my birthday party suddenly had a change of heart. My phone started ringing off the hook. "Oh, Garcia dear, how are you? I think there must be some misunderstanding between you and Martin. All couples fight, you know. It's perfectly normal. You shouldn't let things get so out of hand. We all know Martin. He has a sharp tongue, but he doesn't have a bad heart. You should try to be a little more forgiving." I didn't answer a single call. I just changed my settings to block all unknown numbers. The hypocrisy of these people, the way they shifted with the changing winds, was utterly nauseating. Trapped in his crumbling world, Martin finally swallowed his pathetic pride. He and Daniel came to the Sunset Pavilion together. It was a bright, sunny afternoon. I was upstairs in a private room, playing a game of chess with Elena. One of the young waitresses came up, looking nervous, and told me that a Mr. Martin and a Mr. Daniel were downstairs, insisting on seeing me. I didn't even look up from the chessboard. "Tell them I'm busy." But Martin refused to leave. He just waited in the downstairs lobby making a scene. He had abandoned his usual arrogance, adopting a humble, pleading tone. He kept telling the staff that it was all a big misunderstanding, that families fight, that there's no such thing as an old grudge between loved ones. The commotion was starting to annoy me, so I sent Elena down to deal with them. She stood at the bottom of the stairs, her arms crossed, looking down at the two pathetic figures. "Mr. Martin," she said, her voice dripping with disdain, "Garcia's position is very clear. You were the one who stood up at her birthday party in front of everyone and demanded that you start splitting every single expense. You were the one who wanted to draw a clear line between you. Well, now Garcia is simply granting your wish. Since everything is to be split 50-50, and you two are now separate, why on earth should she let you live in her house?" Elena threw my own words right back in his face. Martin's face flushed, then turned pale. Being lectured by a woman in public in front of so many people was more than his fragile ego could handle. The anger he had been suppressing finally erupted. He started making a scene right at the entrance of the restaurant. "Garcia, get out here, you venomous witch. I supported you for 30 years and now you're trying to destroy me? How can you be so cruel? Don't 30 years of marriage mean anything to you?" He pounded his chest and stomped his feet like a petulant child, drawing a crowd of onlookers from the street. I watched him from the second-floor window, feeling a cold, clinical detachment. It was like watching a bad play, a drama that had nothing to do with me. I took out my phone and calmly dialed 911. "Hello, I'd like to report a disturbance. There is a man outside my place of business, threatening my safety and disrupting my customers." The police arrived quickly. Faced with 2 uniformed officers, Martin's bluster immediately deflated. He tried to explain himself, but his little tantrum had already been recorded on the phones of half a dozen bystanders. In the end, he was escorted to the police station for a stern lecture. The sight of him being led away, his shoulders slumped in defeat, was the very picture of public humiliation. After the crowd dispersed, a welcome quiet returned to the cafe. I thought that would be the end of it for the day. But that evening, as we were closing up, a familiar yet strangely distant figure appeared at the door. It was my daughter Olivia. Since the disaster at the birthday party, she had remained completely silent. She hadn't joined Daniel in blaming me, but she also hadn't said a single word in my defense. She had become a ghost in our family's war, floating on the periphery, refusing to take a side. But here she was now, standing on the lamplit street, her eyes red and swollen from crying. "Mom," she said, her voice hoarse and choked with tears. What is going on?" Looking at her face, which was so much like my own when I was her age, the heart I thought had turned to stone softened just a little. I brought her inside the closed cafe and brewed her a cup of hot tea. As the fragrant steam swirled between us for the first time, I told her everything. I told her about the mahogany box from my father. I told her about Martin's cruel declaration of financial war. And I told her about his sordid affair with Victoria. Olivia listened in silence, tears streaming down her face. All her life she had believed she was part of a happy, perfect family. Her father was a successful businessman, her mother a gentle, devoted homemaker. She never knew that this picture of domestic bliss was built on a foundation of her mother's silent suffering and sacrifice. And she had certainly never known that the comfortable, privileged life she had always enjoyed was funded entirely by my hidden, immense wealth. "Mom, I'm so sorry," she whispered, her hand closing over mine. Her tears fell onto my skin, hot and heavy. "I'm so sorry. I never knew. When you needed me the most, I just ran away." I patted her hand, a whirlwind of emotions swirling inside me. I didn't know if her sudden awakening was genuine or just a fleeting reaction to the collapse of her world. But at least in that moment I knew I was no longer fighting this battle alone. After his public meltdown and subsequent arrest, Martin became a laughingstock in our social circle. He didn't dare show his face at my cafe again. With his house and car gone, his life went into a nosedive. But he was still clinging to one last life raft, his substantial pension. He had bragged to his friends for years that his retirement income alone was more than what most young people earned, enough to ensure he would live out his days in comfort and style. "I don't need that, woman," he boasted to the few friends who would still speak to him. "I can live like a king on my pension alone." The 15-day eviction deadline came and went. He and Daniel packed their belongings and moved out of the villa, their faces grim, and into a small, run-down apartment. The first thing Martin did after they got settled was go to the bank to check on his pension. He needed to withdraw some cash just to get by. He handed his card to the teller and entered his PIN. "I'm sorry, sir," the teller said, "but your account has been frozen. No transactions can be made." "Frozen? What do you mean frozen?" Martin's voice rose in panic. "That's my pension account. You have no right to freeze it." His shouting attracted the attention of the bank manager, who quickly escorted him into a private office. The manager pulled up his account details and, after reviewing them carefully, explained the situation in a polite, almost pitying tone. "Mr. Martin, there seems to be a misunderstanding," the manager said. "The money in this account is not a traditional pension. It's a premium commercial annuity plan, purchased for you over 20 years ago by a company called NK Group." The manager handed him a copy of the original contract. According to the terms of the policy, the purchaser and sole beneficiary is a Ms. Garcia. There is a specific clause in the contract that states the beneficiary, Ms. Garcia, reserves the right to suspend or redirect payments to the insured, that is you, at any time. Last week, we received a formal request from Ms. Garcia's legal counsel to suspend all payments from this policy indefinitely. The manager's words were like a series of hammer blows, shattering the last vestiges of Martin's hope. What? Not a pension? A commercial insurance policy? And the beneficiary was Garcia? The iron rice bowl he had been so proud of for decades, the foundation of his entire retirement plan, was nothing more than a long-term allowance granted to him by Garcia's father? This realization was more devastating than losing the house or the car. This was a complete and utter negation of his entire life, of his so-called hard work and success. He collapsed onto the leather sofa in the manager's office, his face ashen, his spirit completely and utterly broken. Later that afternoon, the inevitable finally happened. Martin and Daniel appeared outside my restaurant, looking like two ghosts who had lost their way. They just stood on the sidewalk, not even daring to come inside. A waiter saw them and came to tell me. I walked to the glass door and looked out at them. Martin's hair seemed to have turned white overnight. His back was stooped, his face a roadmap of wrinkles. He looked like a defeated old rooster. When he saw me, his lips trembled and it took him a long moment to force out the words. Garcia, we have no food left at home. His voice was a dry, rasping whisper. And my card has been frozen. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a desperate, pleading terror. I just stood there watching him, studying the face I had looked at every day for 30 years. And then, slowly and clearly, I repeated the words he had spoken to me at my birthday party. Didn't you say that you supported me for 30 years and that your duty was done? I let the words hang in the air between us. Well, today I am returning that support to you in full. Martin, we are even now. As my words landed, he swayed on his feet, nearly collapsing. At that exact moment, a taxi pulled up to the curb nearby. Victoria got out. She took one look at the pathetic sight of Martin and his son, and a flash of pure disgust crossed her face. She didn't approach them. Instead, she pulled out her phone and called him. I watched Martin answer, mumbling a few meek words. Then Victoria hung up, got back in the taxi, and it sped away, leaving a cloud of exhaust in its wake. I found out later that after confirming he was completely broke, she had taken what little cash he had left and disappeared from his life for good. Martin was now utterly alone. As if on cue, a moving truck rumbled to a stop in front of the restaurant. The door opened and my daughter Olivia jumped down from the passenger seat. She began directing the movers, who started unloading her boxes and carrying them into the apartment behind the cafe. Then she walked over to Martin. Dad, she said, her voice steady and cold, I'm moving out. I'm going to live with Mom. She looked him straight in the eye. And from this day forward, I no longer consider you my father. We are done. It was the very last straw. Martin's legs gave out and he crumpled to the pavement, a broken man. I had only ever seen such melodrama on television. I never imagined I would get to experience it in real life, only this time I was the one holding all the cards. Martin ended up renting a dark, damp basement apartment and got a bitter taste of what it was like to be at the bottom. Without the buffer of money and status, he discovered that he was, in fact, nothing. He started to be haunted by memories of me, of the warmth and comfort he had always taken for granted. He began a new routine, waiting outside the Sunset Pavilion for me every single day, rain or shine. He wouldn't cause a scene. He would just stand there silently, his eyes following me with the pathetic look of an abandoned dog. He looked so haggard and pitiful that even passers-by started to feel sorry for him. But my heart was a block of ice. He started trying to cook, preparing my favorite dishes, pork ribs, tomato bisque, and bringing them to the restaurant in hopeful little containers. I wouldn't even glance at them. I would just have one of my employees dump the food into the trash right in front of him. He started writing long, rambling letters of repentance, page after page filled with sentimental recollections of our 30 years together, crafted to be as touching and tear-jerking as possible. I took the letters from him and, as he watched, fed them one by one into the office shredder. Watching those papers, filled with his false, self-serving emotions, turn into a pile of meaningless confetti brought me a grim satisfaction. My son Daniel, after being repeatedly beaten down by the real world, finally broke as well. Unable to find a decent job, he was forced to take grueling manual labor positions. He came to me begging, tears streaming down his face, swearing he had learned his lesson and asking for a second chance. I looked at his face, worn down and aged by hardship, and felt only a sad, bitter amusement. Your mistake wasn't a lack of filial piety, Daniel, I told him, my voice devoid of warmth. Your mistake was that you are both stupid and cruel. Your father was the mastermind, but you were the happy accomplice, eagerly enjoying the fruits of his crime. Now that the whole criminal enterprise has collapsed, you come begging for mercy? It's too late. I didn't give him another look. I simply had security escort him out. Finally, on an evening with a torrential downpour, Martin reached his breaking point. He pushed past the security guard at the door and burst into my office. He fell to his knees in front of me with a loud thud. Cold rainwater streamed from his white hair, mixing with the hot, desperate tears on his face. He raised his hands and began to slap himself hard across the face again and again. Garcia, I was wrong. I was so wrong, he wailed. I'm not a man. I'm an animal. I never should have treated you that way. Please just give me one more chance. The last chance. We can start over. I swear I'll be good to you. I'll be your slave, I'll do anything. He was sobbing hysterically. The old me would have been heartbroken to see him like this. But the me of today felt nothing. I watched his pathetic, groveling performance with an empty heart. I waited patiently for him to finish crying, for his storm of emotion to pass. Then I opened my desk drawer and took out a document and a pen. It was the divorce agreement I'd had drawn up weeks ago. I placed them on the coffee table in front of him. "Martin, do you know why a mirror breaks?" I asked quietly. He looked up at me, his expression blank and confused. "It's because it can no longer stand to reflect the ugly face looking into it. A broken mirror can never be put back together. Even if you glue the pieces, the cracks will always be there. And I have no desire to see you in my reflection for the rest of my life." My voice was soft, but it carried an undeniable finality. He stared at the divorce papers, his whole body shaking like a leaf in the wind. "Sign it," I said. I looked at him, and for the first and last time, I allowed myself to feel a flicker of pity. "For Olivia's sake, I've left you a small apartment in the suburbs. It will be enough for you to live out the rest of your days. Consider this, from me, Garcia, a final act of mercy." In the end he signed it. His spirit was gone, his eyes hollow. I kept my promise, transferring the deed of a small suburban condo to him. He moved in, but he was a shell of a man, living in a daze, surviving on the meager assistance provided by the local community center. As for my son Daniel, after a harsh education in the school of hard knocks, he finally seemed to have woken up. He never came to me for help again. I heard through the grapevine that he found a job as a courier. He worked from dawn until dusk, and while the work was exhausting, he was, for the first time in his life, supporting himself with his own 2 hands. And my daughter Olivia became my greatest comfort and ally. She started helping me at the restaurant, learning the ins and outs of the business, and discovered she had a surprising talent for management. After a year, I sent her to Italy to study art history, a dream she had long given up on, encouraging her to finally chase her own happiness. And the Sunset Pavilion, under the joint management of Elena and myself, flourished. We opened new branches, established our own brand, and became 2 of the most well-known female entrepreneurs in the city. 1 year later, we held an anniversary celebration for the flagship cafe. The room was filled with friends and patrons, buzzing with light and laughter. I wore a custom-tailored forest green gown, and moved through the crowd with an elegance and confidence I had never known before. Elena came to my side, raising her champagne flute. "To the past," she said with a grin, "and to an even better future." "To us," I replied, and we clinked our glasses. I drank it down in one smooth gulp. As I looked out the window, I caught a glimpse of something on the street corner. It was my son Daniel, dressed in the faded uniform of his courier company, standing under a sycamore tree. The sun had darkened his skin and he was thinner, but his eyes seemed clearer than I had ever seen them. He didn't try to approach or interrupt the party. He just stood there for a moment across the street, looking at the joyful scene inside. Then he looked in my direction and gave a short, almost imperceptible nod. He turned and disappeared back into the flow of traffic. I picked up my own glass and, in a silent toast, I raised it in the direction he had gone. The afternoon sun, warm and bright, streamed through the spotless glass of my window and fell upon me.